Dvir Abramovich is the chair of the Anti-Defamation Commission, and he joins us now. Dvir, good morning.
Good morning, Virginia. Good to be with you.
How do we account for these neo-Nazis turning up on a regular basis now, it seems, in Melbourne and protesting for, well, whatever they're protesting for? What's your best explanation for this?
Let's be very clear about something, Virginia. These hardcore white supremacists are not protesting anything. What they've done is to declare war and an open season on the migrant community. And they're using this as a wedge issue to insert themselves into the conversations, not just to stoke fear and intimidation, but also to draw new recruits into the wolf cause. And this is very dangerous because we know from history, especially with the Christchurch massacre, that when you malign and demonize a particular group, you are creating a climate of hostility, and this usually leads to violence, sometimes deadly. So we need to understand where this is coming from. And just want to add, what they're pushing is the great replacement theory. There is a core belief of the neo-Nazi movement that the white race is under extinction by a rising tide of non-white immigrants who are being controlled by a cabal of Jews. So what was unthinkable 5-6 years ago has now become a reality in Melbourne.
Do you say that you and others are now fearing deadly violence in a city like Melbourne might result from these groups gathering together?
Where white supremacists gather, violence usually follows, and we've seen lone wolf shootings across the world. And I don't think it is a stretch. And the worst thing that we can do is to simply dismiss them as clowns or as individuals who are not a threat. They're a clear and present danger, and you can see that there's been white supremacist attacks all across the world. We don't need, for a Christchurch massacre in our city, to take these clear and present dangers seriously.
And are we responding adequately, in your view? You saw how the police responded. We've had a furious response from the police following that rally on Saturday. And they're saying they're appalled by it all. Is our response correct?
I think our response is correct, and I'm heartened that the Victorian government has heeded my call for the ban on the Nazi salute. But I think we need to have a much broader and a much larger response. This is a whole of society challenge. What we need to do is to look at these movements as terrorist organizations. We need to say that any movement that glorifies, celebrates and promotes Nazism, that promotes violence, that dreams of an era in Australia, needs to be outlawed. We need to give law enforcement every resource possible to deal with this. This is a problem from hell that we can't run or hide from.
Dr. Abramovich, there is legislation, and you alluded to that just there, that's coming down the pipeline to ban the Nazi salute. Does that need to be sped up?
I don't think we have a second to lose. And I think we, as a community and as a society, need to stare this beast in the eye and to understand the danger that we are facing. Whether it is Brendan Tarrant or Dylan Roof or shootings in Texas and in El Paso, we had Robert Bowers a few years ago walk into a synagogue, the Tree of Life synagogue, and massacre worshippers simply because they were Jewish. So we shouldn't wait for these kinds of attacks to tackle this problem. And I'm glad that the government is looking closely, but I think we need to have a much larger strategy in place, and we need to give police and counterterrorism and other law enforcement agencies every tool possible to fight back and to push back against this.
Is there a particular explanation for why it's happening here in Melbourne? I'm not aware of there being these repeated neo-Nazi rallies being held in Adelaide or in Perth or in Sydney. Why Melbourne?
Well, it's clear that there's a concerted effort and a campaign by these homegrown extremists to take their online activity into the real world. They are saying we are here to stay. We are going to be a daily reality for every Victorian. And I think they are intent on disrupting and tearing every value that we hold dear And this is what's happening on a daily basis. It may not happen on a daily basis in the streets, but we are seeing it online. And I think that every Victorian would be shattered and would be horrified to know that in this multicultural, pluralistic city, we have this cancer of intolerance and racism. And they're obviously based here, but this is a problem that's happening across the nation.
And across the world as well. I noted a neo-Nazi rally, I think in Paris, just a little while ago of 600, which would have been enormously distressing for that city in particular. Dr. Dvir Abramovich is with you, Chair of the Anti-Defamation Commission. But conversely, do we run the risk of giving them too much attention, of focusing on them as we are in this conversation this morning, the legislative response as well? Is that actually giving them the attention that they crave?
The neo-Nazis will be here, and they don't really care so much about publicity. I know some people think that that's what they are craving, perhaps, but we can't put on the blinders. We can't ignore this problem. We can't, in a sense, turn aside and say they do not exist, because if they do, they will go under the radar, and we will have the massacres that we saw in Christchurch, and we will see the attacks. We need every single law enforcement agency, but we also need to take the community on this journey during this conversation so they can understand the threat that we are facing. The way you deal with extremists in our society, whether it is neo-Nazis or whether it is ISIS, is by confronting them head on and actually understanding that this is a collective problem that we need to work on and that we need to push against.
So if there is to be, and I sincerely hope there's not, but if this happens again and we see this mob turn up again in the city in a few weeks' time, what should differentiate our response next time?
I think we need to stand shoulder to shoulder with every person who is protesting, who is pushing back, who is fighting this scourge. And we need also police to be there to make sure that there is no violence. Because, again, what white supremacists are doing is to declare in a very clear way that they will try and undermine the very foundations of our democracy. I mean, a democracy, Virginia, is not just about the rights that we have. It's also about what we are willing to tolerate. What does it say about Melbourne or Victoria that we are willing to absorb, that we are willing to accept these kinds of hate mongers, these kinds of agents of evil? That's not who we are as Australians. It's not who we are as Victorians. And I think the time has come for the government and for the community to say enough is enough. We cannot have, Hitler's evil legacy resuscitated and celebrated in the heart of Melbourne on the steps of Parliament House.
Thank you for your time, Dr. Abramovich. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia.
Dr. Dvir Abramovich there, Chair of the Anti-Defamation Commission.